Okay, it's just about time to start. I see that the numbers have sort of plateaued of people signing into the session. So I hope most of the people who are intending to attend this session have already logged in. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I will say, 大家好，欢迎来到 PHS Live. Welcome everybody to PHS Live. This is our session on researching China mission history at PHS. My name is Jenny Barr, and I am a reference and outreach archivist here at the Presbyterian Historical Society. I don't see, with my view of Zoom, I don't see the names of people who are attending, but I've heard in advance that there are some old familiar friends who are joining us today, so I'm really happy about that. Kristen, my colleague Kristen will be moderating this session, and Charlene, one of my fellow reference archivists, will be helping to manage questions. We'll have time at the end of the session for questions, so if you have anything you'd like to ask, you can click on the Q&A icon on your screen and type in your question, and we'll try to get to everybody. If we don't have time for everybody, we can forward those questions that we haven't gotten to the reference department. I wanted to say we've got a very large volume of reference questions in our queue at the moment. So if you don't hear back from us right away, please be patient with us. We'll get to you. We just have a big bunch of work, which is great. We feel loved because people are asking us questions, so that's wonderful. Kristen will drop the email address for the reference desk email into the chat window. As we go along, we'll be using the chat window to share links with you of things that I mentioned during this talk. So we have quite a bit of territory to cover here today. Very fittingly, the China mission topic is just as big as the country. So the history is long and complicated, and the documentation at PHS is also very voluminous. So the way I've tried to balance this talk is we're going to be talking about the history of the mission and how it got started and the context in the US and China under which it developed, but we'll keep the history section very brief, and we'll spend a little more time today talking about the documentation we have here at PHS. That is really what I know more about, so it makes more sense to spend a little more time on that. I am in the middle of putting together a bibliography of resources that will help people who want more about the history of the mission, the history of Christianity in China in a broader way, and also lists of published board reports and station reports that we have here at PHS. So kind of it may answer a number of the questions that people have today about what publications we have. We'll be putting that together into a bibliography. And when we share out the recording of this session, we will include the bibliography and some other resources as well. So one thing that I wanted to ask everybody who's attending the session today to do is, if you have a favorite book about China mission history or the history of Christianity in China, add it to the chat window. We would love to see what people are using, to see what references people really like and why they like them. And we would love to add those things to our bibliography if we don't already have them on our list. So the chat window is likely to be a busy place during this session. So you may have to scroll up and down a little bit to find what you need. So launching into the history of the mission, like I said, it's going to be the 30,000 foot view, 60,000 foot view. So Presbyterian missions began, foreign missions began at the end of the Second Great Awakening period. And there was a big emphasis on evangelism during that Second Great Awakening. The US had a growing sense of its own position in the world, and the Protestant denominations were likewise very focused on expansion. Domestically, there was a big push to plant new congregations west of the Mississippi and to expand the home mission work throughout the continental United States. In 1837, the Presbyterian Church formed a board of foreign missions to oversee the church's foreign mission work. I should note that I'm giving you a very simplified version of this history. I'm not talking about some of the work that happened a little bit before that time through the Synod of Pittsburgh and under the auspices of the non-denominational American Board. There were some Presbyterians who went out before 1837. The foreign mission movement really took off after the Civil War and continued to grow through the 20th century till the early 20th century. By the middle of the 20th century, the focus of foreign mission really started to shift, with the missionary role becoming more of a supporting role for indigenous churches and leadership, and indigenous leadership of institutions as well. So that's sort of a really broad overarching context within which the Presbyterian foreign mission work got started. So how about China specifically? China was the Presbyterian Church's first foreign mission, and it would also go on to become the biggest field, and I believe that that's true for both the Northern Presbyterian Church and the Southern Presbyterian Church. It was a really, I mean, it's not surprising, it's a very big field, and it's a very appealing field because there's so much work from the missionaries' point of view, there's so much work there to do. In China, before 1842, travel by foreigners within the country was very tightly restricted. At the conclusion of the First Opium War between China and Britain in 1842, the Western powers were allowed to establish settlements in 5 port cities. And that actually is where the earliest missionaries settled, not surprisingly. They were sort of restricted to those cities and couldn't go into the interior of China. After the Second Opium War in 1860, China was forced to make additional concessions to the Western powers. And importantly for our story, that includes protections for religious worship and missionary work, which had been really difficult to do before that. Missionaries then were able to travel into the country outside of those treaty ports, although those centers of work really sort of stayed as, you know, the locus of the work, and then it grew out from there. I will be talking, and actually our documents are organized according to the Northern and the Southern Presbyterian churches. So I'll be referring to those things, the Northern and Southern Presbyterian missions in China. That's not their official names, but that's how a lot of people refer to them. And that corresponds to the Presbyterian Church in the USA and the Presbyterian Church in the US, which divided during the Civil War into 2 different denominations. So the mission work actually began a couple of decades before that split happened. The first, let's see, we're gonna switch slides here. I'm a little awkward with my slides and switching screens, so I will ask you all to bear with me. The 2 maps on the screen give you a sense of the geographic distribution of the missions. This is in 1921, the Northern Presbyterian Mission on the right here, all the way from Peking in the north, all the way down to Hainan in the south. and then the Southern Presbyterian Church on the left. And it's a little more consolidated in terms of the territory, but lots of different stations packed in there. The first mission station that lasted for any length of time in China was in Ningbo, right on the coast here, and that would eventually become part of the Central China Mission. It was established in 1844, opened by Divy Bethune-McCarty, who was a physician and an evangelist. Later in today's session, you'll be hearing a little bit about another missionary who was stationed in Ningbo named Mary Morrison. The Northern Mission, as it grew, divided up into 8 major regions. You see 7 of them on the map here. The 8th mission region is Yunnan, which would be sort of in this area in the southwest. When this map was published, Yunnan was part of the Thailand mission, so it's not part of this group quite yet. The details of the establishment and growth of these missions are covered pretty well in the collection guides that we have. I'll be showing you those in a little while, and the details of dates and station names and the rate of growth and so on is covered pretty well there. So I won't go into it here because I'm trying to keep it brief. So jumping over to the Southern Presbyterian Mission in China. This is a 1925 map, as you see. If you can spot Nanking on both maps, you can get a sense of the orientation of the map and also the difference in the scale of these two. At the outset of the Civil War, the Presbyterian Church formed their own foreign mission board, and the first mission station in China settled by the Southern Mission was in Hangzhou, which is all the way down here, in 1867. So pretty soon after the denomination formed, they were actively engaged in foreign mission. And as this Southern Mission grew, it divided up into 2 major regions, the North Jiangsu Mission and the Mid-China Mission. And North Jiangsu is sort of this upper region, and the Mid-China Mission is the lower region over here. Again, the collection guides that we have on our website give you a fair amount of information about the growth of those missions, so we'll skip over it here. I want to note here that today I'm just talking about the Presbyterian Church in the US and the Presbyterian Church in the USA. There are other Presbyterian and Reformed denominations that sent missionaries to China. It seems like every denomination on earth sent missionaries to China. There's a lot of activity, mission activity going on in the country. The United Presbyterian Church of North America, which later merged with the PCUSA, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and the Reformed Church in the US. So they all had missions there. There may be other Reformed or even Presbyterian denominations that I'm missing in that list. So we don't necessarily have extensive archival records about any of these other missions, but we can certainly help you with the histories of those if your research area involves one of those missions. So I will go through the next section fairly quickly. I think a lot of people probably know the basic history of China. It was through the period that we're talking about, the late 19th century up through the revolution in 1949, there was a lot of political struggle, military struggle, and the missionaries who went there were working in the midst of all that. So they were subject to a lot of that turmoil. They were sort of caught in the middle of a lot of it. No one ever joined any missionary field because they thought it was going to be an easy job or a comfortable job. But it does seem like the China missionaries faced extraordinary obstacles. When you look at all the riots and Christian attacks and anti-foreign attacks and backlash and government edicts that restricted some of their educational and evangelistic work. There are records in the PHS holdings that document a lot of this, including missionaries who were interned by both the Japanese and later the communists, reports of evacuations of missionaries or entire mission stations. It just is sort of trouble upon trouble upon trouble. So it's a fascinating story and definitely one worth looking into. In the earliest days of the mission, the very earliest days of the mission, most of the missionaries who were sent over were either men or married couples. Towards the end of the 19th century, though, pretty soon, the number of unmarried women who were appointed to the mission field began to grow. There are a number of reasons for this, and I won't go into a lot of detail about that. At the peak of the mission work in China, women made up over half of the missionary force, and nearly half of that number were unmarried women. So there were a lot of teachers and medical professionals, doctors, nurses, who went over without their husbands, without any husband. So that's a really interesting part of this story for me. These women were finding a lot of professional opportunity in the foreign mission field that they couldn't necessarily find at home. Towards the end of today's session, we'll be telling you a little bit about one of these women, Dr. Eliza Leonard, who served in Peking, Beijing, from 1895 until her death in 1924. And she just accomplished so much. It's really notable. As a side note, speaking of doctors, if the focus of your research is medical mission or medical missionaries, we have a guide that we've created to walk you through the materials that we have at PHS on that topic for both the Northern and the Southern Church. I'll ask Kristen to drop a link to that subject guide in the chat window. And then we'll also be adding that when we share out this session. We'll also include that as one of the things we point to. Other ways that women were involved in the mission movement, probably a lot of you are familiar with this already. Women's foreign missionary societies, both nationally and down to the level of the congregation, were instrumental in funding the mission that was happening overseas. They raised lots of money, and they were also very involved in recruiting missionaries to send overseas. And the things that they funded were not just missionary salaries, but also the building and maintenance of schools, hospitals, medical schools, and so on. So now I'm going to just say a little bit about union work between these two missions. It seems, in the United States, they were very divided. Maybe I'm just not aware of any interactions, the level of interaction that there was here, but in the mission field, both these two Presbyterian missions and other Protestant denominations joined together to work on union efforts, building institutions, running colleges, hospitals. And one example of this is the Nanjing Theological Seminary, which was opened in 1906. That was a union school to help train Chinese leadership for the church. In that same year, a union synod was formed, which was made up of 5 existing presbyteries. So that's relatively early in the history of the mission. In 1927, the first assembly of a Chinese Protestant church was held. It was initially called the Presbyterian Church of China, but it quickly grew to include churches from around 15 different Protestant denominations and several independent churches. So the name was changed to the Church of Christ in China. So now I'm not going to really talk all the way up to the end of the time of missionaries working in mainland China. In the 1930s, the number of ordained ministers, missionaries who went overseas began to decline, and the number of ordained Chinese leaders began to grow. So this is really, this fits the pattern of sort of the wider picture of foreign mission in the mid-20th century of the focus shifting towards indigenization of churches and institutions. And this sort of goes right along with that pattern. Definitely not the end of the story, but I'm going to leave it there for now. There is a lot of great work done on the history of these two missions. And again, I'll refer you to the forthcoming bibliography that we're going to be putting together. So now we're going to talk about some of the resources that we have here at PHS that document the missions, both the Northern and the Southern Presbyterian missions in China. As you see, this is how I group these materials in my mind. We have a lot more than this, but these are sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories of resources that I think researchers who are just beginning their work, or even researchers who have already done a substantial amount of work, resources that they're going to want to know about, and they're going to want to know how to navigate. So we'll go through some of these things now. The first thing, we're starting at the level of sort of the individual biographical story. And what you see on the screen is a foreign missionary vertical file for W.A.P. Martin, who is a very well-bearded fellow. And if you can see this picture, his two friends are also very well-bearded. This is one of my favorite pictures in our collection, is these three guys and their beards. So I'm going to be swapping back and forth between these slides and our website, so wish me luck. Okay, so let's see where we are. I'll set this. This. Go here. Sure. Okay, that worked. Okay, so I hope people are seeing the Foreign Missionary Vertical Files Index, the search, the screen where you launch a search for these materials. This page gives you a little bit of information about the denominations that are covered here and what kinds of materials you'll find in the collections. Each file is different, so sometimes you'll have all these things, and sometimes it'll be a thin little file with just one, biographical sketch or something. The missionary application forms and the candidate reference blanks can be very informative about missionaries' backgrounds and educational history, and also their reasons for becoming missionaries. That can be really interesting to read about. If you're lucky, there are photographs like the W.A.P. Martin file, correspondence. Sometimes there are newsletters, clippings, other printed material. It's really a smorgasbord. So these are really fun collections to work with. I'm going to show you how to use the search screen here, and I've already got this loaded just to make things move a little faster so we don't have to wait for pages to load. We're searching again for W.A.P. Martin, and I happen to know that his first name is William, so I've put that in just in case there are multiple William Martins. And I'm also narrowing it down even further by saying that the field of service that he worked in was China. If you left this blank, you might get the William Martin who was in Brazil as well, and then you could look through the list of results and you'd find the right one. Okay, so then here we have the result of this search, Excuse me. And here is just a brief summary of William Alexander Persons Martin. And if you click on his name, you'll see the full record about him. So these records are great at confirming, you can use the birth and death date to confirm that you've got the right person. It's often got a spouse's name. If we have a separate file for the spouse, that will be linked here, and you can just click on it and jump to that file. It tells you the call number of the materials. I'd like to point out this digital content. I'm not going to click on this right now because I'm trying to save some time, but this will take you to Pearl, our digital repository, and I would like to recommend that anybody who wants to know anything at all about Pearl watch the PHS live session that Gabriella and Allison did about Pearl. It's got a really great information about how to navigate, how to find things, best search tips, and looking at the metadata in the repository. So lots and lots of information there. So definitely take a look. And this, so this would link you to a listing of the scanned items and show you thumbnail pictures of the things that have been scanned. Okay, so the foreign missionary file index, I just wanted to mention, I did a search and there are over 1,700 names of China missionaries there. So there's quite a lot there. And if you dig through, you'll definitely find something of interest. Okay, so now we are going to hop back here to this. Okay, that worked. The next two things I'm going to talk about are archival records, and this is really sort of the key thing that a lot of researchers come to us to find. Published items you can find other places. The foreign missionary files are really great and really rich, but the real bulk of what we have is these archival records. And I've divided it up here into these two categories: personal papers of missionaries. These, let's see, where am I? These are really sort of varied depending on what the missionary kept and how the collections came to us. We have records of both northern and southern missionaries who worked in China. These collections can be a really great source for photographs, correspondence, diaries. There are often lots of dear friends letters, which are the circular letters that were sent home to be reproduced and then shared out widely to describe the work in the mission field and to help raise funds for the mission. There are often articles and printed materials, and sometimes things that were collected in the field by the missionaries. So you find all sorts of really interesting things in these collections. Next will be the China mission records, and these are the big kahunas, the big collections. The Presbyterian Church in the USA collection is 71 boxes. The Presbyterian Church in the US, the Southern Church China mission records, is a little bit smaller, but it's a very rich resource of information about the mission nevertheless. Let's see, we also have, under China mission records, we also have collections of photographs, foreign mission photographs that includes China for both the Northern and the Southern Church. We have a separate collection that is missionary correspondence department's letters. That was an office of the PCUS, and they received the letters and then distributed them out again. So there's one big collection of these letters, which is a really fantastic resource. Okay, so now we're going to hop back onto the website and look at the search screen for finding some of these records. So we're going to stop that, and then we're going to go here. Yep, Here. Okay. So on our website, from the homepage, you will see these 3 sections up at the top. Collections is where you want to go to find what I'm talking about now. So if you click on collections and then scroll down a little bit, you will see this guides to archival collections. These are guides or finding aids that we've put together to describe these sometimes small, sometimes large collections of records. They have more detail than you would find in a typical library catalog record. So say you're looking for the papers of Amy Milliken, who was a missionary who served initially in Hunan and then transferred to the church, to the mission in Ningbo. We're going to, I think I've already got this. Yep. So I've typed in the word Milliken, I've hit search, and I come up with one collection, the Milliken family papers. So that's good. If you do a search, you can do keyword searches or searches by name. If you do keyword searches, I do want to say the way these collections were, these guides were put together, the names of places and people were written using the romanization system that the missionaries used. So for example, Weixian is spelled very differently in the system that the missionaries used from the Pinyin system, which is typically what's used for library catalogs. So I would just say if you're searching the guides and the library catalogs, you're going to have to try different variations, different romanization systems to make sure you're capturing everything. We have a chart that we've created for the names of the mission stations in the Presbyterian Church that sort of lays out the different spellings of those. We'll be including that once we publish this session. We'll include that as one of the additional resources that you can use. Okay. So the Milliken family papers, I just wanted to show you a couple of things that you'll find in a guide. There's a summary section that tells you the dates of the collection. There's the call number, which is very important. If you're asking us about it, we'll want to know the call number. The size of the collection, 3 feet. And links to Perl, digitized content in Perl. There's a biographical note, which some of these are quite long and detailed. This one's pretty long. This is several family members that it describes. So you can get sort of the basic outline of the family and the family members and what they did. And then down here, I'll just open up this collection inventory. I want to point out this is a little bit of an outlier, this collection. We are digitizing material every day. So we're adding new materials to Perl constantly, but this is a rare case where the entire collection has been digitized and added to Perl. So if you click on this digital link over on the right-hand side, you will see, you'll be taken to this folder and the digital items that are in this particular folder. So that if you find one thing in here that you're really interested in, you can go right to it using this link. And again, watch the PHS live session on Perl. It's really great. Okay, so next I would encourage you to browse around in these finding aids. Try out different kinds of searches, keyword searches, name searches, and just see what you find. And you can, once you've got a finding aid all the way open, if you use a Control F page search, you can also do keyword searching within the finding aid itself. So play around with those, you'll find all kinds of great stuff. Now we're going to just take a look at a couple of things here. This is the big Presbyterian church in the USA, China Mission collection, 71 feet, it's enormous. It's one of our most frequently used collections. It is not as well processed as we would like. We would really like to have a chance to go through and do a more detailed description of what's in there, because there's so much great information in there and it can be a little bit hard to find. The collection inventory is sort of organized by location, and then sometimes also by institution. So if you're looking for Shandong Christian University, you'll find a bunch of different folders to look in. They're not all together in the same place, but you will find lots. What I wanted to show you here was this biographical note. I mentioned earlier that the history of the mission and how it grew is pretty well documented here. And we'll just jump over to the equivalent collection. See, it's much smaller, of the Southern Presbyterian Church. And again, a really good history that sort of gives you the context of the growth of the mission. Okay, so now we are, okay. So I think we're done looking through the collection guides. We're going to go back here to mouse work. We'll go back to our slides. Okay, so now I'm going to try to step it up a little bit. I think I'm running long, as I suspected I would, as I did when I practiced this. The next collection that we see used a lot by researchers is the Board of Foreign Missions Correspondence and Reports. This is a collection that we have here in the building. It's on microfilm. We are not able to lend the microfilm, which is too bad, but it's a really giant collection of letters and reports from the very earliest days of the foreign mission. It covers all the different fields that were in place between 1833 and 1911, I think, are the date spans. So anybody who's doing early mission work will want to take a look at this. There are some really great things about this collection. One of them is this binder here is a name index. So say you want to find all the correspondence that Divvy Bethune-McCarty wrote. You can look up his name here and it will point you to entries in these red books, which are calendars of correspondence. And that means there's, you know, it tells you the date and who it's from and to, and then it gives you a really short summary of what the letter is about. So you are able to skim through and choose the things that you want to go and find on the microfilm. So this is a collection that sees a lot of use at PHS in our reading room. As I said, the microfilm is not available through interlibrary loan, but it has been digitized and put into a subscription database called Archives Unbound. If you are affiliated with a university, you should check with them to see if they have a subscription or encourage them to get a subscription to it. It's one of the Gale Cengage databases. So it's handy to be able to see these things online. It's easier to use, easier to read, and then to save PDFs of the letters from the online version. You can do that with the microfilm as well. It's just a little, I find it a little difficult. Okay, so jumping ahead, we have a really good collection of published minutes of the foreign boards of the Northern and Southern Church, and then also station reports, and sometimes, or mission reports, and sometimes station reports as well. You can also find some of these station reports within the papers, either personal papers or some of the mission papers contain those things as well. But the published versions are nice, you know, it's right there, it's on the shelf. A lot of these are not yet in Calvin, so I will be including them in the bibliography, the main runs of what we have here. Let's see. I want to, these reports also include the women's mission boards. We've got a lot of those as well. I want to mention the Yale Day Mission Library. Probably a lot of you are already familiar with that. They have a really great online collection of reports and other printed materials from a lot of different missions, including the Presbyterian missions. So that's a really good resource for you. Okay, we'll jump ahead to denominational periodicals. These, where the board reports sort of give you the high-level summary and the statistics and so on, these denominational reports really dig down into the daily life and the detail and the human story and the achievements of the missionaries and the people that they're working with. These are really wonderful resources. There are a number of them. I haven't listed out which periodicals are produced by which denomination, but we will be including the main runs of these that we have in that bibliography that we're putting together. Some of these periodicals are indexed and some of them are not. It's always nice when you can look in the index and go right to what you want. Some of them will have like a special issue on China. So it varies from periodical to periodical. So it pays to sort of take your time and look through and see what you're getting there. Okay, hopping ahead. So this is sort of the and everything else collection. The Foreign Mission Library was initially established as a reference library at the Board of Foreign Missions in New York. And it was both for the board itself and also for maybe even in large part for the missionaries who were being sent out to the field. There are reference works on the history and cultural background and language of the different countries that the board was working with. And then there are a lot of pamphlets on a really wide variety of topics and minutes and station reports and so on. The station reports that I showed you were in this Foreign Mission Library. A lot of these are not, most of these are not yet in Calvin, our online catalog, online library catalog. A lot of them are in this big thing that you see here. Probably a lot of you will be familiar with it. Every once in a while we talk to somebody like a college student now who looks at that and says, what is that? So you can find a lot of really incredibly interesting stuff in this collection. A lot of it is not widely available. So we've got some, you know, not the last copy ever, but a lot of really fairly rare stuff here. And this also gets used a lot by the mission researchers who come in to work in the reading room. Okay, so although these things aren't in Calvin yet, we, Sharon and Gabriella, our two catalogers, are hard at work putting these things into Calvin. So sooner or later, they will all be in there, which will be great. Okay, so those are the main categories of archival and published resources that we have here. Next, we'll move on to research at PHS, and this is this is our reading room that you see with our tables packed full of people. Right now, during the pandemic, we've got a big empty reading room, which is sad, but we'll get back to this stage sooner or later. As a reference archivist, one of the things that I find really gratifying is to see the research that the books and articles that our researchers produce. We have a page of recent works by our researchers, and where we highlight some of the books that people who've come in to use our collections have then gone on to publish. I think Kristen's going to drop that into the chat window, the link to that page. So the range of research that has been done here about the China mission is really broad. Some of the recent examples are children's literature in the late Qing and early Republican era, Sino-American relations in the first years after the Communist Revolution, the 1937 Nanjing Massacre, the Zhifu School for the Deaf in Yantai in Shandong, and the Presbyterian Mission Press in Shanghai. So you see sort of a lot of different topics can be covered, and that doesn't include any of the biographical things that have happened about individual missionaries, and there have been several of those as well. So I want to highlight two research stories now. One of them is, the first one is about Eliza Leonard, Dr. Eliza Leonard. Bill Leonard, who's a former member of the PHS board and a longtime friend of PHS, had a great aunt who was one of the first women doctors to go to China. And she was a single woman who went over in 1895. The link to this YouTube is, and I think Kristen's going to drop that in the chat as well, if that's easier for you instead of having to type it. The talk that Bill gives is about his research journey, discovering that he has this ancestor and then finding papers about her and doing research here at PHS to fill out her story, and then finally ending up traveling to China to see some of the places where she worked and lived and where she died. I think it's definitely worth checking that out on YouTube. The next one is Dr. Thomas G. Nimick's article that was published in the most recent journal of Presbyterian history, which is the scholarly publication that we put out. We're going to show a brief clip of Fred Tangeman interviewing Dr. Nimick about his research. The full video will be available through our website, and Kristen's going to share the link to that page as well. But we'll just show you a little bit to whet your appetite for that. And we will go here and here. Okay. So there we go. All right, let's start at the beginning. Okay, just watch a couple of minutes of this.
Hello, everyone. I'm Fred Tangeman, Director of Communications at the Presbyterian Historical Society. I'm joined today by Dr. Thomas G. Nimick, who is Professor of History at the U.S. Military Academy in West Point. Tom is a ruling elder at Vermont's Presbyterian Church in New City, New York. He's published on the administrative history of Ming Dynasty China, including local administration in Ming China, the changing roles of magistrates, prefects, and provincial officials. He's currently working on a biography of Mary Morrison and on an account of Presbyterian polity at work in the early days of the Presbyterian mission in Ningbo, China. So Tom, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here with you.
So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a discussion about the recent article that Tom has contributed to the Journal of Presbyterian History. That article is titled Missionary Women's Outreach to Poor Women in China, Origins of the Industrial Class Strategy. That appears in the spring-summer 2020 Journal of Presbyterian History. And for those of you who don't know, the journal is the scholarly publication of the Presbyterian Historical Society. The first question I had for you is a little bit of something that sets the stage for the story that you cover so well in your article, and that's about Mary Morrison. Your article focuses on the experiences that Mary had in the city of Ningbo in the mid-19th century. So can you start by telling us a little bit about Mary before she and her husband Thomas arrived in China in December 1859, and also a little bit about how prepared or maybe unprepared Mary might have been for life in China and as a missionary?
So Mary grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey. She was a member in good standing of the First Presbyterian Church in Elizabeth. She had a pastor who encouraged the young people to think about the possibility of mission. He had served as a home missionary. At the same time, she was a very strong-willed individual and had taken the initiative on her own after finishing her schooling to set up an elementary school for girls with her younger sister in the city of Elizabeth. She then went to the what was a new phenomenon at the time, normal school, teachers college in Albany, New York. And as best we can tell, was actually spent some time teaching in the New York City schools before she met her husband, Thomas. So she was interested in mission, and he had just dedicated himself to mission. And they were appointed by the Presbyterian Board of Foreign Missions to go together to China. They would have had no language training before they went because it wasn't available. China was recently open. In 1844, the mission had been established in the city, so there were people already there who could orient them. But it was still a big step to go on the 3-month voyage off to China after being newly married and arriving in this treaty port city. And we'll probably get back to the circumstances there. But so she was ready for mission. She was interested in mission. She shared that interest with her husband, and off they went.
Can you mentioned this, I think, a little.
Okay, I'm going to stop that there. This is an excerpt of the entire interview. It's about half an hour long, not really 9 minutes as you see. Tom has a lot of really interesting stuff to say about his research process in this interview. So I would really recommend that people check it out. But I'm going to stop that now, and we're going to go back to PowerPoint. Okay, and that is the last screen switch that I'm doing, I promise. So a couple of things that I wanted to say about research, and I know we're running long. Before we start with questions, I just wanted to point out that both of these examples of research were only possible because the families of these missionaries saved the missionary records. There's letters and journals and photographs in both of these collections, and how would you ever find that information if the families did not save it? It's just so important for people to save that material. We are always completely thrilled when a family decides to donate those materials to us for safekeeping. From the researcher's point of view, it's really great to have a lot of those materials together in the same place. It saves them a lot of travel time. If you're a PhD student, you can't afford to fly all over the country. So it's really nice to have them here for safekeeping as well. So as we've heard back from people about this session, I believe that a number of the people who are here watching the session today are either retired missionaries or the children of missionaries. In China, in the case of China, it's much more likely to be that, right? Somebody at PHS suggested that we hold a virtual reunion for the children of missionaries who worked in China, or maybe a wider thing of missionaries in other fields as well. And I, for one, would be really interested to see that happen. I just found out a couple of days ago, I was talking to my aunt and she said, did you know that you have a cousin who was a missionary to China? And I had never heard this before. It's a cousin by marriage. My cousins are the Fazes, and Sophie Lyon Faz was the child of David Nelson Lyon. And I looked him up, and we have a file for him in the Foreign Missionary Vertical File Index, and I just haven't had time to go look at that file yet. So I don't know anything about him other than I have this family connection. So I would really love to look into that a little more and share it with other people who are sort of in the same situation. So finally, I would like to say that we at PHS are always incredibly grateful to our donors and our supporters who make programs like this possible. If you would like to make a gift to PHS, you can visit our website, and Kristen will be dropping the link to the giving page into the chat window. And it's also going to be on the last screen of this slide. And we really appreciate your support. And all of us at PHS, thank you very much. Okay, so now I have run just about an hour long, and I'm hoping that we have time for some questions. I hope nobody minds if we run a little bit over.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much. We have a few questions that came into the Q&A section. So I want to start with Dave Hackett's question. He was wondering what acknowledgements are there today in China of the early work of Presbyterians?
That is a great question. I don't know. The answer that I have comes from the researchers who have come here to work on the history of existing institutions. What I don't know is much about the existing Christian population in China. So that I can't really tell you much about. We do fairly frequently have people come here, well, not now when everybody's locked down, but until January or so, we had a lot of people coming here to research the history of hospitals, for example, that were founded by Presbyterian missionaries. Sometimes even the old buildings are still in existence. A lot of research on schools that have their roots in the Presbyterian missions. And there is a very high level of interest in that among these researchers. So there's publishing going on about that. There are films being made. We have had visits from film crews looking into that kind of thing. So there is a fairly active research interest. I don't know how that manifests inside China itself.
We have another question from Dave. He was wondering if there's a comprehensive list of Presbyterian mission workers who served in China.
Probably not a comprehensive list. There are several lists. There's a really good list that was put together by the Board of Foreign Missions. I don't know if it goes all the way up to 1949 or 52. And that is a Northern Presbyterian Church list. It's part of the record group, record group called 360, which is a personnel record group. That's the missionary, foreign missionary vertical files are largely this record group 360, that same group. And there are lists of missionaries in there. The Arthur Judson Brown book, 100 Years, has a very good list, but that's as of 1937 when that book was published. There are a couple of lists of Protestant missionaries that we have in the Foreign Mission Library. So that would be a broader thing than just the Presbyterians. And the Foreign Missionary Vertical File Index would be one list, although that's not completely comprehensive either. So there are various resources. There's another one that I'm forgetting. Yeah, so I want to say probably not any of them is going to be 100% comprehensive, but there are some pretty substantial lists.
We have a question from Tom Nimick, so who you just shared about, and we want to thank Tom for contributing to our journal in this past journal issue, and for sitting down for an interview with us. Tom was wondering if you're looking for a picture outside of the Presbyterian Church in Ningbo, how can you best check the foreign mission photographs?
The processed record groups of photographs they have folder level descriptions for the most part. You'll be able to search by, you could do a keyword search for Ningbo and see what is in there. I would guess that a lot of the materials in there are taken by Presbyterian missionaries or collected by the boards, because that's how those collections were generated. But there are undoubtedly going to be a few photographs that were taken, by missionaries just of the area, maybe of the people in the region. They're not, until something has been scanned and added to our digital repository, Pearl, it's not really granularly described. So what you'll find in those foreign mission photograph collections is, a folder label that's pretty broad, and you'll have to go through each image in there. The other issue with those photographs is the foreign boards tried to make notations on them about where they were taken and who they were taken by, but that information has not always been preserved very well. So sometimes you have a batch of photographs and you don't know much about it. Maybe you know a region, but you don't know a lot of detail about who's in the photograph. For example, that can be one of those frustrating things for researchers, is who is that and how do I find out? So I'd be happy to talk to you, Tom, if you would like me to take a look and see what photographs I can find here from Ningbo and let you know sort of the range of what we might have here.
We have a response to one of Dave's earlier questions from our friend Bill Leonard. He wanted to let Dave know that in his talk about Eliza Leonard, he describes a personal interaction that he had in Beijing with a Chinese researcher who was researching physicians at the Presbyterian Hospital in Beijing. So that's a good one to visit to get.
That's definitely great. Yeah, thanks, Bill. Hello, Bill.
We have another question from Dave. He was wondering, what about Chinese written records about the Presbyterian mission in China?
We do not have very much in Chinese in these collections. What we have is occasionally collected items that the missionaries gathered. I do not think that any of those would be descriptions of the mission work from the Chinese point of view, or even from anybody's point of view in Chinese. I think you would probably need to go to another repository for that. I don't know if anybody in the United States would be collecting material like that. They could be, and I just don't know about it. That might be a reason to take a trip to China and see some of the archives there. I know some repositories have established relationships with archival repositories in China, and they have visits back and forth between the two. I don't think the Presbyterian Church has done that. I don't know. Well, I don't think PHS has done that, or if they have, it hasn't been recently. But I would sign up. I would sign up to go if they did have established that kind of relationship.
Stanley Brunn was wondering if there are any maps of China prepared by missionaries, either of their travels in the country. He's a geographer, and he's interested in the history of mission.
Okay. There are maps. I showed you just a couple on the first page. Those were prepared by the Board of Foreign Missions, not the missionaries themselves. When you look through the collections of, say, the personal papers of missionaries, you'll occasionally find a map. Not as many as you would hope or that I would hope to find. I'm always hoping that there's going to be a bigger collection of maps to work with. I would have to say a lot of the maps that we have here at PHS are things that were generated by the Board of Foreign Missions or some organization that's trying to highlight the work of the mission and not necessarily the missionaries themselves. That is a good question, though. It would probably take a little bit of research through those record groups to see if anything like that turned up. I would think that when those collections were being processed, that would be the kind of thing that a processing archivist would call out and write down. You would hope. One other example, though, is on the very first slide. Let me go back here. Use this mouse. Let's go back here. Okay, this slide here, this map of Weixian it's published in, I think, an anniversary publication about the, excuse me, about the mission station, but it must have been drawn by the missionaries because, it's got a lot of specific local detail. These crosses are all outstations, not burial sites, as you would think. So there are going to be things like this, and this was in a publication, not in an archival collection, but there will be things like that. But finding them will be difficult.
We have a quick question from Winston Ho. He was wondering if there's any advice you have for finding modern names for an obscure mission site. He has historic names from records, but is not sure what that might be today.
Yeah, that's, if it's an obscure site, that might be a little hard. There, let's see. There's a book by, a reference book by Tiedemann. Let's see if I can find his first name. His first name is R.G. Tiedemann, Tiedemann, and it's the Reference Guide to Christian Missionary Societies in China. That actually does a really good job of giving the Wade Giles, or the variation of Wade Giles and the Pinyin and the Hansa, the characters for the names of the major mission stations. But if it's a less major station, I'm not sure he would cover it. If you wanted to send the name that you have and any information you have about the date, and if you know of anybody who worked there, you could send that to the reference desk and we could take a look and see if we could find anything.
I think that's all the questions we have. I just want to thank everybody for joining this afternoon, and just let you know that if you have any outstanding questions or want to follow up, to reach out to us at the reference desk email. I'm going to type that in the chat right now, or just give us a call and leave a message and somebody would be happy to get back to you. So thank you guys. Oh, we have one more question.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
So before we lose him, is Dave Hackett related to the Hackett Hospital in China by any chance? Did we lose him?
We may have.
Okay, that's too bad. I think it was the biggest mission hospital.
He said no.
Period of time named Hackett. So I was wondering if that was a relative. Okay, thank you, everybody. This is
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, for moderating, and Charlene for dealing with questions.